Hello, I'm Freya, and what happened that day still makes my heart race. My sister dragged the cops straight to my door, screaming, "Arrest this thief! She stole $1,000 from me!" Then she pointed to her pregnant belly and shouted, "Raise the fifth baby or go to jail!" I froze for a moment, trying to make sense of her betrayal, my own blood twisting the law against me. But what I said next changed everything. How could someone you grew up with turn your life upside down like that? And could I really stay silent when my family was willing to destroy me over money and lies? I still remember the quiet weight of being overlooked, the way your own family can make you feel invisible, even in your own home. My name is Freya, the youngest in my family, and if you think that being the baby of the house comes with perks, think again. In my household, being small meant being seen as inconsequential, dismissed at every turn. My older sister Sable seemed to glide through life with a certain untouchable arrogance, and I, on the other hand, had spent years navigating the shadows of her attention, or rather, her lack of it. Growing up in suburban Houston, Texas, our neighborhood appeared perfectly serene from the outside. Manicured lawns, neatly painted houses, and the occasional sprinkling of kids on bicycles. But inside my family's home, the storm of judgment, comparison, and subtle cruelty was constant, and I had learned early to keep my thoughts and feelings tightly wrapped like fragile glass I dared not drop. That evening, as the sky started to dim and stretch shadows across our small street, I had been tidying up the kitchen, minding the routine that I had convinced myself was my responsibility. Leora, my sister who often acted as a quiet anchor, my hope if you will, had just left after dropping a plate of her famous cookies and a smile that said, "I see you." Small gestures like that mattered more than anything. They reminded me that I wasn't completely alone, that not everyone in my family thrived on manipulation and belittlement. Then, everything shattered. The abrupt screech of tires on our driveway made me freeze mid-wipe, and I saw Sable storming up to the front door, her pregnant belly prominent, a wild glint in her eyes that immediately triggered unease in my chest. Moments later, two uniformed officers followed closely behind her, blinking in confusion and caution. I wanted to question what was happening, to understand, but the words Sable barked froze me instantly. "Arrest this thief! She stole $1,000 from me!" The neighbors were peering through their windows, some stepping onto their porches to witness the spectacle. Heat rose in my cheeks, not from embarrassment alone, but from the raw, sharp sting of betrayal. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the accusation with the reality I knew. I had never taken a penny from Sable, not once. But there she stood, pointing dramatically to her swelling belly, as if the act of motherhood itself gave her immunity, twisting the stakes with a claim that left me speechless. "Raise the fifth baby, or go to jail." The officers, hesitant and professional, looked at me, expecting an explanation, a confession, something. And I had nothing but disbelief and anger. How had things come to this? I took a slow, trembling breath, trying to ground myself. I remembered all those evenings I had been pushed aside, my birthday celebrations overshadowed by Sable's accomplishments, my opinions dismissed in family conversations, the countless times I had swallowed my feelings to maintain some semblance of peace. And now, in front of everyone, she had weaponized the law and public shame against me. My parents arrived shortly after, their expressions a mixture of confusion and hesitation. My father cleared his throat, his eyes darting between Sable, the officers, and me. My mother's hand hovered over her chest, as if bracing for an explosion. Sable smirked with the kind of confidence only someone who has learned to dominate through fear can manage, fully aware of the power imbalance she created. The tension thickened, a living, breathing entity in the room. Every passive-aggressive comment, every side glance from my siblings fed the underlying humiliation pressing down on me. I could feel my pulse in my temples, the pressure building, my chest tight with anger I had been holding in for far too long. And then I thought of Leora. Her small gestures of kindness, the way she had silently taken my side in trivial family disputes, all of it became my tether, my anchor. In this storm, I remembered her gentle words when we were children, her encouragement when I faltered. "You are stronger than you think, Freya. Don't let them define your worth." That memory, though faint against the chaos around me, ignited a spark, a whisper that perhaps I could navigate this. Perhaps I could survive Sable's manipulations without losing myself. I opened my mouth to speak, rehearsing words in my mind that could assert my truth, defend myself, without giving her the satisfaction of a confrontation that would spiral further. The officers were still waiting, uncertain, and Sable's smirk suggested she relished this attention, the public spectacle she had orchestrated. I felt the weight of the entire neighborhood's gaze, the crushing judgment of family, and the urgency to act correctly, strategically, wisely. As I struggled to formulate a response, I realized something crucial. This was more than a family dispute. It was a test of my composure, my intelligence, my ability to stand my ground in a situation carefully manipulated to humiliate me. If I failed, it would confirm everything Sable wanted, that I was powerless, insignificant, and unable to protect myself. But if I acted cleverly, thoughtfully, decisively, I could reclaim my dignity, expose her manipulations, and begin shifting the dynamics that had kept me in the shadows for years. I glanced at Leora, who had quietly moved closer, a subtle nod conveying her silent support. That simple gesture reinforced a thought I had buried long ago. I didn't have to face everything alone. There was an ally, a witness, someone whose understanding of the family's complexities could provide a glimmer of hope in this chaos. I took another breath, steadying my shaking hands. I would not be steamrolled by Sable's theatrics, not here, not now. And yet, the question lingered in my mind like a razor. How far could I push without losing everything I had fought to maintain? Could I turn the tables without becoming the villain she had cast me as? I clenched my fists internally, feeling the anger simmer, the strategies forming, the long-suppressed determination rising. And as I opened my mouth, the words poised to meet the challenge of the day, I realized that this was only the beginning. The family I thought I knew was capable of cruelty I had not fully anticipated. But I was no longer the invisible youngest sister. I was Freya, and for the first time, I was ready to assert that I mattered. I closed the front door softly behind me, trying not to let the officers see my hesitation as I guided them toward the living room. My thoughts were a chaotic storm, spinning faster than the ceiling fan overhead. How could Sable have escalated things so quickly? A small part of me, maybe a remnant of my younger, naive self, hoped that a calm explanation could dissolve the tension. But the reality was far harsher. Sable thrived on manipulation, and my family's tendency to placate her only made me more vulnerable. After the officers left, promising to investigate the claim but clearly uncertain, I stepped out into the backyard to breathe. The evening air was crisp, scented faintly with jasmine from my mother's garden, and yet I could hardly enjoy it. I wandered along the narrow stone path that wound through the rose bushes, my fingers brushing over petals, almost seeking comfort from something living and real. The shadows of the tall oaks stretched long across the lawn, echoing the heaviness settling in my chest. I thought about all the moments Sable had undermined me, the subtle and not-so-subtle betrayals that had, over the years, chipped away at my confidence. I remembered last spring, when she had borrowed a few $100s from my savings under the guise of emergency bills, only to flaunt a new designer bag later that week. Or the countless times she subtly redirected my parents' attention during family discussions, turning minor mistakes of mine into spectacles while excusing her own faults with charm and a coy smile. Each incident had been a tiny arrow aimed at my sense of self-worth, and now, with this dramatic accusation in front of the police, it felt like a full-blown barrage. I sank onto the wooden bench under the pergola, the cushions cool against my jeans, and allowed myself a long, slow exhale. My mind traced each betrayal, each dismissive glance, each whispered slight in the hallways of my childhood home. Resentment and sadness welled up, but alongside it, a fire began to ignite. I wasn't going to be a passive player any longer. I refused to let Sable dictate my worth, my narrative, or my future. Pulling out my phone, I hesitated for a moment, then dialed Leora's number. She answered on the third ring, her voice calm and grounding, like a small lifeline. "Freya, everything okay?" she asked, a touch of concern threading her words. I explained, carefully measuring each phrase, summarizing the confrontation without giving away my rising panic. Lyora listened patiently, the kind of patient that felt like an embrace in itself, and then she reminded me, gently but firmly, "You're smarter than she is. Don't let her trap you in her chaos. Think first, act second. I've got your back." Her reassurance, though small, felt pivotal. We agreed that I would gather anything resembling evidence of her past manipulations, receipts, messages, anything that could prove her pattern of deceit without directly confronting her in a way that could backfire. My fingers tingled with cautious anticipation. This was the first time I felt I had even a sliver of control over the situation. The next morning, I ventured to the small cafe just a few blocks away, a quiet place where the barista knew my name and rarely judged my constant scribbling of notes in a weathered journal. I spread my papers across the table, a mosaic of receipts, old text threads, and mental notes of incidents I had carefully cataloged over the years. With each page I sifted through, the puzzle pieces began to fit together, revealing a clearer pattern of Sable's manipulations. I jotted down observations, noting dates, times, and the subtle ways she twisted family dynamics to her advantage. I could almost feel her presence looming behind me, even in the bustling cafe, and it made my resolve harden. Returning home that afternoon, I slipped into my role carefully, pretending normalcy while mentally rehearsing scenarios, responses, and contingencies. The living room felt smaller, more confining than ever, the walls echoing with imagined whispers of Sable's accusations. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. Tired eyes, a tightened jaw, hair loosely pinned back, and realized how much this situation had forced me to grow in a matter of hours. No longer just the overlooked youngest sister, I was becoming someone capable of strategy, foresight, and resilience. Late in the day, as the sun dipped behind the horizon and shadows lengthened across the backyard, I stumbled upon a small envelope tucked beneath a potted fern, one I hadn't noticed during earlier tidying. Curious, I opened it carefully, my pulse quickening. Inside were several photos and a note, evidence that Sable had exaggerated her financial loss to manipulate others. My heart raced, not from anger, but from the possibilities this discovery represented. I had the leverage to challenge her claims, to turn the narrative in my favor, but I also knew the risk of exposure. If she discovered I had found these, she would escalate. Sitting back on the wooden bench, the envelope in my lap, I realized the delicate dance ahead. Strategy over emotion, precision over confrontation. I could feel the adrenaline hum beneath my skin, a cautious excitement mingled with fear. This wasn't just about proving innocence, it was about reclaiming my voice, asserting my presence, and showing that I was no longer invisible. The evening darkened, and I walked slowly back inside, the house now quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. I placed the evidence in a secure drawer, a small fortress in the chaos, and prepared myself mentally for the conversations that would inevitably follow. I would act, but I would act smartly, carefully, ensuring each move was deliberate. And for the first time in years, I felt the subtle thrill of control, not over Sable, not over my family's whims, but over my own destiny within this storm. With this evidence in hand, a plan began to crystallize in my mind, not fully formed, but enough to give me direction. I knew Sable wouldn't make it easy, but that didn't matter. I had a lifeline, I had proof, and most importantly, I had my own growing courage. The path ahead was fraught with tension, deceit, and confrontation, but I was ready to navigate it. And somewhere deep inside, I sensed that this was only the beginning of a much larger reckoning. The weight of the envelope in my hand felt heavier than I expected as I stood on the front porch, the late afternoon sun casting a warm, golden glow over the neighborhood. I paused, taking a deep breath, trying to steady my racing thoughts. I had evidence now, but the path ahead wasn't clear. Each step I considered had to be deliberate. I couldn't let Sable anticipate my moves, but the truth demanded exposure. I settled into the wicker chair, cradling the envelope on my lap, my fingers tracing the edges as though the tactile sensation could anchor my racing mind. I reviewed the notes and photos once more, mentally piecing together Sable's long history of manipulation. The inconsistencies were glaring. Dates that didn't align, Financial claims contradicted by receipts I had collected over the years, and subtle, yet unmistakable patterns of deception aimed at keeping me off balance. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of empowerment. I knew I needed counsel, someone I could trust. Lyora came to mind immediately. Not only was she supportive, but she had a keen sense for strategy and could help me navigate the legal nuances without alerting Sable. I quickly dialed her number, the sound of her voice bringing a comforting clarity to my swirling thoughts. I explained everything in precise detail, focusing on the evidence and the inconsistencies I'd uncovered. Her calm, deliberate tone guided me, helping me construct a plan rooted in logic rather than emotion. By late afternoon, we agreed on the first step: a discreet consultation with a legal advisor who specialized in family disputes and small claims. I had to ensure my actions were airtight. I packed the envelope carefully, slipping it into my tote bag along with my notes, and headed out. The streets of suburban Houston were familiar, the traffic flowing steadily as the sun dipped closer to the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and lavender. The drive to the law office allowed me a rare moment of solitude to mentally rehearse possible questions and responses. Every what-if ran through my mind, each scenario a small rehearsal for the confrontation I knew was inevitable. The legal office was modest but professional, tucked between a bakery and a flower shop on a quiet side street. I was greeted by a receptionist who directed me to a private room. Moments later, a kind-faced attorney entered, her demeanor calm and attentive. I laid out the envelope and my notes, explaining Sable's history, her recent accusation, and my concerns about escalation. She listened carefully, asking probing questions that forced me to articulate my observations with precision. It was exhausting, yet exhilarating. I felt my confidence solidifying with each detail I presented. After an hour of discussion, we formulated a plan. Document everything meticulously, confront Sable subtly, and prepare for potential pushback. The key was not to attack aggressively, but to use her own inconsistencies as a shield. I left the office with a sense of cautious triumph, my footsteps lighter despite the weight of the looming conflict. The streets were now bathed in the soft glow of evening, and I allowed myself a moment to appreciate the quiet resilience forming within me. Returning home, I slipped inside without alerting anyone, the house eerily quiet. The living room felt different now, almost tense with anticipation. I placed the envelope on the coffee table and began outlining a step-by-step approach, rehearsing how I might present the inconsistencies without igniting a defensive frenzy from Sable. My heart thumped with a mixture of anxiety and excitement. Later, on the front porch, I decided to test the waters subtly. Sable was seated on the steps, her posture relaxed, a smirk playing on her lips as though she sensed an invisible victory. I approached calmly, each movement deliberate. "Sable," I said, my tone neutral. "I was looking through some receipts and noticed something curious from last month. Could you clarify why this doesn't match your claim?" Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of unease betraying her otherwise confident demeanor. "Oh, I must have misplaced that," she replied quickly, her voice a fraction too sharp. I didn't react. I let the silence stretch, the weight of observation pressing down. She shifted, clearly uncomfortable under my calm scrutiny. The small victory, seeing her momentarily unsettled, sent a ripple of satisfaction through me. But I remained vigilant. This was only the first test. That evening, as I retreated to my bedroom, the envelope securely tucked away, I reflected on the confrontation. The small inconsistency I highlighted had shaken Sable more than I expected. For the first time, I realized that intelligence and strategy could outmaneuver chaos and manipulation. Yet, I couldn't ignore the lingering threat. Somewhere, Sable was plotting, likely scheming a response even more insidious. My pulse quickened with a mix of apprehension and readiness. Before drifting to sleep, I checked the messages I'd received earlier from Sable. One, in particular, caught my eye. It was cryptic, hinting at a plan that sounded both personal and potentially damaging. My stomach knotted, but I also felt a surge of determination. She had one more card to play, and I needed to be prepared for it. The stakes had just risen, and the next moves would require every ounce of cunning I could muster. I turned off the bedside lamp, the shadows of the room deepening, and allowed myself a moment of quiet resolve. This wasn't simply about proving innocence anymore. It was about standing firmly, reclaiming my voice, and demonstrating that I would no longer be manipulated. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but I felt ready, anchored by clarity, evidence, and the quiet strength I had cultivated within myself. The moment I read Sable's message, the chill ran deeper than any breeze in Houston could manage. She wasn't just playing small games anymore. This time, her reach extended far beyond petty accusations. My pulse quickened, not from fear alone, but from the sudden clarity that I needed to act decisively. Every hesitation now could be costly. I folded the paper carefully, setting it on the kitchen counter, and ran a hand over my face, trying to steady the knot in my stomach. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting a soft, amber glow through the blinds, and yet the warmth of the evening offered no comfort. I stepped onto the backyard patio, breathing in the familiar scent of freshly cut grass, mingling with the faint aroma of dinner from the neighboring house. My mind replayed the last confrontation with Sable, how her smirk, so infuriatingly confident, had belied the fragility I had glimpsed. But now, with this latest message in hand, I knew the stakes were different. I couldn't let anger dictate my actions. Strategy had to be my compass. I found Sable sitting on the far edge of the patio, flipping through a magazine with casual disinterest, though the slight twitch of her fingers betrayed tension. I approached slowly, keeping my voice steady. "Sable, we need to talk." Her head snapped up, eyes narrowing as if expecting some trap. "Oh, I thought you might come around eventually," she said, her tone dripping with faux cordiality. Then, with a subtle tilt of her chin, she added, "But first, I just need to ask, did you happen to borrow my gardening scissors last week?" "They're missing, and I know how careless you can be." It was a classic move, Sable trying to establish dominance through minor accusations, testing the waters for control. My stomach churned with frustration, yet I forced a calm smile. "I haven't touched them, Sable. Maybe someone else misplaced them?" I paused, letting the uncertainty hang in the air. Her eyes flicked to my mother, who was quietly observing from the doorway, her expression unreadable but attentive. That subtle hesitation told me everything I needed. The small inconsistencies in Sable's accusations were becoming her own undoing. I leaned against the railing, letting my voice carry lightly but firmly. "You know, Sable, I went through the invoices and photos I gathered. There are a few things that don't add up with your claims about last month's expenses. Would you like me to go over them?" Her smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, the sort of break in composure that anyone could miss if they weren't paying attention. "Invoices. Expenses. Really, Freya, always the meticulous one. You know it's complicated, right?" "Yes, complicated," I replied evenly. "But when we're talking about fairness and honesty, it's really quite simple. You said I took money last month, yet these records don't support that. The numbers just don't match." A hush fell over the backyard. My mother shifted in her chair, and even my brother, usually indifferent, leaned in slightly, curiosity piqued. Sable's eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a tight line. For the first time, I saw the shadow of panic. She was calculating, and I knew that now I had the advantage. I don't know what to say," she murmured, her voice tight. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head. She was used to intimidation working instantly, and now it wasn't. I felt a quiet satisfaction, tempered by the awareness that this was just the beginning. Later, as the sky shifted to deep shades of indigo, I retreated inside to plan my next steps. The kitchen lights cast soft reflections on the counter where the envelope sat, reminding me of the evidence waiting to be presented in a formal capacity if needed. But I needed more than proof. I needed allies. Lyora's guidance had been invaluable, but I had to ensure no one else in the family could be swayed by Sable's subtle manipulations. The evening stretched on, and I reviewed every detail, every word Sable had said, cross-referencing with receipts, photos, and previous messages. Each small thread reinforced the same narrative. Sable's version of events was full of holes, and those holes were becoming my shield. My fingers traced the paper edges, a tactile reassurance that I had a tangible grip on the chaos she tried to create. But just as I felt a semblance of control, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number blinked on the screen. You think you have the upper hand? You haven't seen the real plan. Be careful where you step. My heart thudded hard, a mix of fear and adrenaline coursing through me. Sable wasn't finished, and this message confirmed she was escalating. But I wasn't about to retreat. I set the phone down, straightened my posture, and reminded myself that preparation and patience were my allies. I had evidence, a plan, and the mental clarity to navigate whatever she unleashed next. By nightfall, I felt a strange blend of exhaustion and resolve. The backyard, now shadowed and quiet, seemed less threatening than it had hours before. I knew Sable would act soon, but I also knew that I had already shifted the power dynamic. For the first time, I wasn't simply reacting, I was controlling the narrative. And while the coming days promised more tension, more challenges, and more confrontations, I felt ready to face them with eyes wide open and strategy in hand. Even as I sat on the living room couch, the glow from the table lamp casting shadows across the walls, I could still feel the weight of Sable's last message pressing down on me. It wasn't just words. It was an unmistakable promise that she was preparing something far worse than any petty trick I'd seen before. And I ran a hand over my forehead, trying to focus, to sift through my anxiety and frustration and find the clarity I needed. My mind darted through the details I'd gathered over the past days, receipts, messages, inconsistencies, and I realized that if I didn't confront her directly, she would continue to manipulate and control the narrative. I glanced at my phone, hesitant at first, then took a deep breath and tapped out a message to Leora. I need your support tonight. Things are escalating, and I want to address this before it gets worse. Almost immediately, a reply blinked back. I'll be there. Don't let her rattle you. Remember, the facts are on your side. The reassurance calmed me slightly, but I knew the confrontation wouldn't be simple. I stood and paced the living room, thinking through my approach. Sable thrived on reaction. She relied on others' emotions to mask her misdeeds. I couldn't give her that satisfaction. My first move had to be deliberate, calm, and precise. I decided to involve my mother in a subtle way, ensuring that at least one neutral witness observed the interaction. That way, Sable's usual tactics of twisting stories in private would be less effective. By the time I approached Sable in the kitchen, the tension in the air was almost tangible. She looked up from her coffee with that same infuriatingly composed expression, like she owned the entire house. I squared my shoulders, meeting her gaze steadily. Sable, I said clearly, my voice calm but firm. We need to stop pretending. I've gone through everything, the accounts, messages, and receipts. Your accusations are baseless, and I won't allow them to continue unchecked. She laughed softly, a sound meant to belittle, but I felt no intimidation. Unchecked. Freya, you always think you're in control. Do you really believe anyone will side with you? I don't need anyone to side with me blindly, I replied. I have facts, and I'll let them speak louder than words ever could. I held up a few documents, carefully gathered evidence showing inconsistencies in her claims. My mother had stepped into the doorway, quietly observing, while Leora arrived shortly afterward, settling silently at the far end of the room. Sable's eyes flicked between the papers and my mother, her composure flickering for the first time. It was subtle, just a fraction of hesitation, but enough to show that my strategy was working. You can't prove anything, she hissed. You're making assumptions. I'm not making assumptions, I said evenly. I'm presenting evidence. You've manipulated records, and while you may have succeeded in confusing some family members in the past, it ends tonight. I've documented everything. Any further attempts to slander or intimidate me will be recorded and addressed appropriately. The room was silent, except for the ticking of the wall clock. I could feel Sable's internal panic growing, though she fought to mask it. This was the first time she had no immediate verbal defense, no sharp retort to undermine me. It was empowering, even as fear lingered in the background. I had taken control, at least momentarily. But then, as I turned away to take a deep breath, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. A chill ran down my spine as I answered, expecting perhaps a benign error. Instead, a distorted, emotionless voice cut through the speaker. You think you've won? Sable's next move will make this look trivial. Prepare yourself. You can't hide from what's coming. I hung up, my stomach twisting. The voice didn't need to say more to instill dread. The implication was clear. Sable wasn't done, and her reach extended beyond anything I had anticipated. I felt the fire of determination rising, blending with fear, forging a focus I hadn't realized I possessed. This was no longer about minor accusations or family squabbles. It was about protecting my integrity, my peace, and the truth. I shared the call with Leora, who nodded solemnly, her expression grave but supportive. She's escalating, but now you know what you're up against, she said. We can plan for this, anticipate her moves, and counter them. The rest of the evening became a careful orchestration. Leora and I reviewed every detail of past interactions, identified potential weak points in Sable's strategy, and discussed how to present our case in a way that would withstand any manipulation. Every step was calculated. Who would be present, what documents to keep handy, how to remain calm even if provoked. By the time night settled fully over the neighborhood, the house was quiet except for the occasional creak of settling wood. I sat on the couch, phone in hand, replaying the events of the evening in my mind. Sable was dangerous, cunning, and relentless, but I was no longer a passive participant in her games. I had allies, evidence, and a plan. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, drawing in a slow, deliberate breath. I knew Sable was preparing something that could challenge everything I had built, everything I believed about fairness and justice. But I also knew that I was ready, prepared. And this time, I would not just react, I would take the initiative. I couldn't shake the chill that ran through me when I read Sable's latest message. The words weren't overt threats, but they carried the weight of someone who had thought through every possible way to make life miserable. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I tried to calm my racing thoughts. There was no time to hesitate. The longer I waited, the more control she would have. I moved to my home office, pulling together the documents I had carefully collected over the past weeks. Receipts, email exchanges, screenshots of messages, all lined up like soldiers ready for battle. The soft hum of my computer fan was the only sound breaking the silence, and yet every notification ping made me flinch, expecting some new attack from her. I opened my inbox and noticed an unusual string of messages from family members, a few ambiguous comments that suddenly made sense in light of Sable's recent threats. Someone was trying to tarnish my reputation subtly, perhaps hoping I would respond rashly. My pulse quickened, but I forced myself to breathe, slowly and deliberately. I wasn't going to play into her game. Instead, I started compiling a timeline, connecting the dots from Sable's manipulations to these newly discovered attempts at slander. By mid-evening, I had a clearer picture. Sable had posted private comments online and shared misleading messages with some distant family members. Each attempt was calculated to make me look unstable or dishonest. But she hadn't counted on my meticulous records. I printed the evidence, labeling each piece carefully, creating a clear trail that anyone could follow. When Leora arrived, she immediately sensed the tension. "I saw some of the posts," she said quietly. "You have everything you need to respond, but it has to be strategic. No emotional reactions." I nodded. "I know. This isn't just about defending myself. It's about making sure she can't manipulate anyone else. It's time the truth comes out publicly." We decided that the best way to confront Sable was in a controlled, public environment. I contacted our family to arrange a small meeting at a local community room, one of those quiet, neutral spaces that lent authority without unnecessary exposure. The idea was to confront her in front of witnesses who could see the facts clearly without giving her the chance to distort reality. The day of the meeting, I arrived early, arranging the documents on a table and checking my phone for any last-minute attempts at interference. Sable walked in with her usual confident air, but there was a subtle tension in her posture that I hadn't noticed before. "Freya," she greeted, her tone deceptively calm. "I see you've called this little gathering. Curious. What's the point?" "The point," I said steadily, "is to clarify facts and end any attempts at misrepresentation. I have everything here that shows how you've manipulated information, messages, and even people to create false narratives about me. I gestured to the neatly organized files on the table. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the documents, but she didn't speak immediately. I continued, explaining the timeline, highlighting the inconsistencies in her posts and messages, and showing proof of her efforts to mislead family members. With each point, I could see the subtle shifts in expressions of those present, some surprised, others finally understanding the depth of Sable's manipulations. Then, as the discussion grew more tense, Sable's defensive veneer cracked. "You think this proves anything? You're twisting my words." "You always think you're the one in control," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "I'm not twisting anything," I responded calmly. "These are documented facts. You can deny them all you want, but the evidence speaks for itself. Your attempts to intimidate and defame me have been noted. Anyone who sees this can verify it." The room was quiet, and for a moment I felt a surge of vindication. Sable's usual tactics of diversion and manipulation were ineffective here. I had prepared carefully, anticipated her moves, and maintained composure throughout. But before I could exhale, my phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. The message was brief, almost cryptic. "You haven't seen the worst yet. She's planning more than you realize. Be ready." My stomach tightened, but I didn't panic. Instead, a cold determination set in. Sable wasn't finished, and her next move could be more dangerous. But I had allies, evidence, and a strategy to counter her. I shared the message with Leora, who looked as grim as I felt. "Then we stay one step ahead," she said firmly. "Plan for everything. Nothing gets past us." We spent the next hour reviewing the evidence again, reinforcing our points, and planning for any attempt she might make to escalate the situation publicly or legally. Every step was precise: who would speak, how to respond, and what documents to have ready. There was no room for error. Night fell over the neighborhood as we concluded our preparations. The house, normally a refuge, now felt like the command center of a strategic operation. I sat back for a moment, letting the tension in my shoulders ease slightly. Sable's shadow loomed over the next steps, but I knew that with careful planning, I could turn her aggression into a display of her own misconduct. The moment I stepped into my apartment, the weight of Sable's latest move pressed down on me like a storm cloud. I set my bag down carefully, each motion deliberate, as if a single misstep might give her the upper hand even from afar. The message she had sent earlier played over and over in my mind. "You haven't seen the worst yet. Be ready." I had no doubt she wasn't bluffing. She never did. I moved into my living room, where the soft light of a single lamp cast long shadows across the furniture. The house, usually a sanctuary, now felt like a chessboard with every piece in motion. I grabbed my laptop and started going through the latest messages circulating among family members, cryptic comments, sudden accusations, and carefully phrased insinuations meant to isolate me. Each one was a spark I had to extinguish before it could ignite a full-blown fire. Leora arrived soon after, her expression tight with worry. She didn't speak immediately but sat beside me, glancing at the screen. "They're pushing hard," she murmured. "It looks coordinated." I nodded, tapping my fingers lightly on the edge of the table. "It is. Sable's trying to make me look like the villain before anyone even sees the facts. But I have proof, and now it's time to use it strategically." We began meticulously documenting every interaction, every false accusation, and every manipulated message. I copied emails, captured screenshots, and highlighted key phrases in bold, creating an undeniable narrative that would make Sable's manipulations impossible to ignore. Each step was methodical, careful, not a single detail could be left vague. By mid-afternoon, I felt a spark of readiness. We weren't just reacting, we were setting the stage for a counterstrike. I drafted a message to a few key family members who had been on the fence, including them in a chain of evidence, ensuring they had the context to see the truth clearly. The weight of Sable's influence was enormous, but if we could break it piece by piece, the foundation she had built on lies would crumble. Late afternoon brought the first challenge. Sable called, her voice silky, deceptively calm. "Freya, I hear you've been spreading your own version of events, she said, deliberately twisting words to provoke a reaction. I stayed calm, keeping my tone steady. I'm not spreading anything, Sable. I'm providing clarity. I have documented evidence of your actions. Everyone involved will have access to the facts. Her laugh was low and chilling. Facts, you say? You really think they'll all side with you? They will see what's true, I replied firmly. Manipulations fall apart when they're scrutinized. She ended the call abruptly, and I exhaled slowly, letting the adrenaline drain just enough to focus again. We prepared for the next move, a carefully arranged meeting in the communal space of my apartment complex. This was neutral ground, a place where family members could come and see the evidence firsthand without interference. I wanted transparency, clarity, and the chance to confront Sable with undeniable proof in front of witnesses. As guests began to arrive, the tension in the room grew almost tangible. Sable entered shortly after, her face a mask of composure that didn't quite reach her eyes. The contrast between her carefully crafted image and the reality I had uncovered was something I intended to exploit. I started the discussion calmly, presenting the evidence chronologically, explaining each instance of manipulation or slander. Family members leaned in, reading over the documents, murmuring amongst themselves, visibly processing what had been hidden from them. Sable's attempts to interrupt or deflect were met with clear, pointed responses. Every claim she made was countered with a fact. Every insinuation met with proof. At one point, she tried to involve another family member, whispering insinuations in an attempt to sway opinions. I anticipated it. I gently, yet firmly, guided the conversation back to documented evidence, maintaining control. The cracks in her carefully constructed persona began to show. Subtle smirks faltered, hesitation appeared in her speech. It was a quiet yet powerful victory. Her authority, built on manipulation, was eroding before my eyes. Then came the final, chilling twist. I noticed an unfamiliar phone number buzzing on my screen, a text flashing briefly before I could even unlock it fully. The words were simple, almost mundane, but the implication was clear. You think it's over. She's planning her ultimate move. Be ready for everything. My heart tightened, but I didn't let fear dictate my actions. I shared the message with Leora, who gave me a steady look. We faced her before. We know what to do, but this could change everything. I nodded, feeling a surge of cautious courage. Sable wasn't done, and her next step could escalate the conflict dramatically. But we had prepared, and I would meet her head-on. My strategy was set. Anticipate, counter, document, and stay one step ahead. Night fell over the city, and the apartment hummed with quiet determination. Outside, the world continued unaware, but inside, we were ready. Every piece of evidence, every calculated response, every carefully chosen word was part of a plan to neutralize Sable's next move. The stakes were higher than ever, and I knew one wrong step could tip the balance. But I was no longer afraid. The morning light slipped softly through the blinds, painting stripes across the floor of my apartment. Despite the calm exterior of the room, my mind raced. Sable's message from the night before lingered in every corner of my thoughts. She was planning something big, something designed to hurt me in ways words alone couldn't capture. I felt a familiar knot of tension, but it was sharper this time, a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. Today would be the test, the confrontation that could finally put an end to her relentless manipulations. I took a deep breath and settled at my desk, opening my laptop. The screen was cluttered with emails, screenshots, and message threads I had collected over the past days. Each one was a piece of a puzzle I had been assembling meticulously, evidence of lies, half-truths, and subtle attempts to twist reality in her favor. I reviewed the material carefully, making sure everything was ordered chronologically and clearly labeled. There was no room for doubt or misinterpretation. By mid-morning, I had my plan. First, I would reach out to the few family members who had remained neutral, those who had witnessed Sable's manipulations indirectly but hadn't yet seen proof. I composed concise messages, attaching the relevant documents, and included a brief note explaining the context. Each message was calculated to present facts, not accusations, ensuring clarity without inflaming tempers unnecessarily. Lyora arrived shortly after, her presence grounding me. "You ready for this?" she asked, her eyes scanning the stacks of printed evidence. "I have to be," I said. "She's going public, and if I don't respond properly, she could turn the family against me completely. I'm done letting her control the narrative." We agreed to meet in the communal space of the apartment complex later in the afternoon, where family members could arrive and review the evidence in person. I wanted transparency and accountability, and I needed to confront Sable directly, with witnesses present. As the hour approached, tension coiled tightly in my chest. Sable arrived first, her smile fixed but brittle, eyes darting around the room as if sizing up the battlefield. When other family members trickled in, whispers and quiet conversations filled the space. I remained calm, projecting quiet confidence, letting the room settle into a charged anticipation. The moment I began presenting the evidence, the atmosphere shifted. I laid out each instance of manipulation, each distorted message, every hidden agenda Sable had tried to maintain. Family members leaned in, scanning documents, murmuring amongst themselves, absorbing information that had previously been hidden. Sable's attempts to interrupt or deflect were met with firm, factual responses. I didn't raise my voice. I let the evidence speak. Each fact undermined her carefully constructed persona, revealing inconsistencies that were impossible to dismiss. Then came the public escalation. Sable's move I had anticipated but dreaded nonetheless. She pulled out her phone, preparing to project screenshots she claimed were proof of my supposed deceit. I had anticipated this exact maneuver. Calmly, I countered, projecting my own carefully compiled evidence directly onto the screen. Side by side, her claims fell apart. Lies unraveled, half-truths were exposed, and the room fell into a stunned silence. This was Twist S11 in full force. Her public attack had backfired spectacularly. Her confidence faltered. Her voice grew sharper and more defensive as I systematically dismantled her arguments. She tried to charm and coerce, but every attempt was met with calm, undeniable truth. The tension escalated rapidly, the energy in the room snapping like a taut wire. By the time I reached the final piece of evidence, proof of her most egregious manipulations, Sable's credibility had collapsed entirely. Family members who had once wavered looked at her with disbelief. Legal authority figures I had discreetly involved nodded subtly, their presence validating the truth we had uncovered. I could feel the adrenaline surging as I spoke, exposing the full scope of her schemes, every calculated deceit laid bare. This was Twist S12, the climax where justice, delayed but inevitable, was finally delivered. Sable's face paled, her carefully crafted veneer cracking. She attempted one last maneuver, a desperate attempt to appeal to emotion rather than fact, but it was too late. I anticipated her strategy, and with calm assertiveness, I neutralized it before it could gain traction. The room shifted from tension to quiet realization. Family members began to acknowledge my resilience and intelligence. I set clear boundaries, making it undeniable that her attempts to control or harm me would no longer succeed. Relief washed over me, tempered with lingering wariness. Sable had been defeated for now, but I knew the emotional scars she left behind would take longer to heal. Night fell outside, the city quiet under the dark sky. I sat back, letting the events of the day settle around me. I had won this battle, reclaimed my dignity, and exposed deception with clarity and strategy. Yet beneath the triumph, a cautious awareness lingered. While the immediate threat was over, the consequences of such deep betrayal would echo for a long time. The morning sun spilled gently across my apartment, painting the familiar walls in a golden glow. For the first time in weeks, I felt a subtle sense of calm settling over me. The chaos Sable had unleashed seemed to have reached its conclusion, at least for now. I sat at the edge of the couch, nursing a cup of coffee, and allowed myself a deep exhale. The evidence, the confrontations, the long days and tense nights, they had all led to this moment. The battle was over, but the echoes remained. I spent the early hours reviewing the aftermath. Emails from family members trickled in, expressing gratitude and acknowledgement. Some were tentative, carefully worded, reflecting a combination of relief and lingering uncertainty. My cousin Matthew, who had wavered in the past, wrote simply, "Freya, I see now. You've been stronger than any of us realized. I'm sorry for doubting you." I felt a pang of emotion, regret, relief, and an unexpected warmth. Small gestures like these reminded me that the truth, once revealed, had the power to rebuild trust. By late morning, I decided to leave the apartment and take a walk. The nearby park, with its wide paths and gentle rustling trees, offered a quiet space for reflection. I walked slowly, feeling the rhythm of my footsteps match the steadying beat of my heart. Every breath of crisp air seemed to ease the tension I had carried for so long. I thought about Sable, not with fear this time, but with measured acknowledgement of the strain she had inflicted. Even as her influence waned, I knew it had left marks that wouldn't vanish overnight. At a small cafe along the park's edge, I paused to rest, ordering a simple tea. The barista, recognizing me from past visits, offered a warm smile. "You look like you've earned some peace today," she said, her words unexpectedly grounding. I nodded, stirring my tea slowly, allowing myself to savor the moment. It was quiet, ordinary, and yet profoundly restorative. For the first time, I could observe the ripples of the past weeks from a safe distance and see how far I had come. Family relationships, while still tentative, began to settle into a new balance. My mother, who had once struggled to see through Sable's manipulations, called in the early afternoon. Her voice trembled slightly, but it carried sincerity. "Freya, I just want you to know I'm proud of how you handled everything. You've shown strength we all needed to see." Hearing her words, I felt a flicker of hope that reconciliation, even gradual, was possible. As the day progressed, I returned home, contemplating my next steps. I organized my apartment, placing documents and evidence into neatly labeled folders, a physical symbol of closure. Yet even in tidying, I recognized the subtle caution still lingering in my chest. Life was moving forward, yes, but awareness of potential future challenges remained. Sable's energy, her drive to manipulate, might resurface in unexpected ways. I could not be complacent, though I now understood that vigilance could coexist with peace. Later that evening, I found myself sitting at the balcony, watching the city lights flicker against the darkening sky. The world seemed calmer, softer, and I felt a quiet resilience growing within me. I had weathered storms of deceit and confrontation, and though some scars lingered, they were now reminders of my capacity for endurance and courage. I allowed myself a small, thoughtful smile. There was relief here, yes, but also the knowledge that life, complicated and unpredictable, would continue to test me. And I was ready. Even in this relative calm, a subtle awareness tugged at my mind. A fleeting sense that Sable, though diminished, might still be plotting something in the background. A whisper of her presence in the corners of memory and future plans. I didn't let fear take root, but I acknowledged it, knowing that preparedness was part of resilience. Some battles, after all, never truly end. They only pause until the next chapter of life presents itself. I closed my eyes briefly, allowing the evening breeze to brush against my face, absorbing the bittersweet satisfaction of having stood firm, reclaimed my dignity, and found my voice. While the immediate threats had passed, I understood now that growth was ongoing, the healing slow, and the vigilance necessary. The city hummed around me, ordinary yet promising, carrying with it the faint but persistent possibility of tomorrow. I finally felt a sense of peace, but I knew some battles are never fully over.